Welcome, everybody, to this workshop, Power of Story, Building Community Through Authentic Storytelling. My name is Eryk, and I am a storyteller. That is the best way to describe what I do professionally, as well as what I do in online spaces. My goal is to share a little bit about my own story, but also explore how storytelling helps to build connection, advocacy, and also has the opportunity to build healing within mental health. So, as we go through, again, like I said, if there's something that I gloss over or if I miss something, if I don't give enough details on something, please feel free to either ask me during the Q&A portion or go ahead and throw the question in the chat and say, hey, you just said that and did not expand upon it. I have no idea what you meant. Feel free to let me know. I don't have a big ego when it comes to that. I am more than willing to admit if I miss something or if I don't explain something super well. There we go. Quick disclaimer before we get all the way into it. I do want to say this is based on my own experience, my own lived experience as an autistic person with ADHD, anxiety, depression, and chronic illness. So I'm sharing what I have learned along the way. But obviously, I do understand that all of our stories are unique and different. So not everything I'm going to say is going to apply to every part of your life story. I even myself have certain facets of my story that I do not share because I do not feel safe to do so yet at this time. So I do want to say that. Don't feel like this is, super prescriptive. The goal is to inspire you and feel free to modify, build upon, or rework any of the ideas that I suggest in a way that works for you best. All right. And I also know that I'm not speaking for all communities or professionals. This is simply my story and what I've learned along the way. Storytelling is everything. I think I've already probably, if you haven't figured out by now, I'm very passionate about it because storytelling is ancient. It's how humans have always made meaning. Since before we were writing stories down, we were telling them around the fire. And multiple cultures around the world can point to some sort of oral tradition of storytelling. Our myths and legends were how we made sense of the world around us, our own identities, and built our communities. Stories shape our identity. They both in the stories that we tell and in the stories that we don't tell, right? If you've ever been on a date or made a friend with somebody who kept some significant information secret, and then somewhere down the road that's like, surprise, I do this too. And you're just like, whoa, this changes everything, right? Because it does. It changes the story of a relationship with that person. Could be good, could be bad, depends on what it is, right? And it also can challenge stigma. So, for example, ADHD had such a terrible reputation. I mean, I myself was undiagnosed until I was 39. But as a child, those ADHD traits I was exhibiting, no one recognized it as ADHD because back in the 80s, people weren't really talking about it. And if they did, it was this terrible thing. And same thing with autism. People were was afraid to tell anyone that they were autistic or that their child was, or their relative was. And now, as these stories are being told, and more people, neurodiverse people are sharing their stories, more people with anxiety are sharing their stories, more people with depression are sharing their stories. And it is helping to remove that stigma as it becomes more mainstream. I remember when Simone Biles stepped back from during the Olympics for her mental health. And at first there was this whole outcry, oh my goodness, I couldn't believe she did that. That's so lazy, whatever. But then the opinion that followed that was so many people saying, oh my goodness, what a relief. If somebody at the top of their game can say, I need to slow down, then it's okay for me to do that too. And that's a big part of what sharing our stories does. It removes stigma. It makes it normal, if you will, simply by getting those stories out there. And the reality is, all of these stories are being told one way or another. The question always is, who is telling your story? Whatever your diagnosis is, whatever your struggle, there's somebody out there giving an opinion that you're probably like, oh my, that's not at all what I'm dealing with. That's not at all what it's like for me. I have met special educators who had a very narrow view of what autism was and how it presented. And they would talk to me about it. And then I would say, well, actually, this is also a factor. And then when they would challenge me on it, I would say, I am autistic. So say what you like. Same thing with depression. I remember talking with a friend about depression, and they were just like, well, they just need, people with depression just need to have a good attitude and they just need to say gratitude things in the morning. And I was like, I'm telling you, it doesn't always work that way. And they're like, well, how would you know? And I was like, because I live with depression. And I have had days where I could say gratitude stuff till the cows came home and I wasn't going to feel better. It's just, and so that's where it can help go against misinformation, and it can help, people understand things in ways they wouldn't if they hadn't heard it directly from you. And telling our stories helps to empower us. One second, please. Telling our stories helps to empower us to reclaim authorship, authorship of our narratives. When I take control of my own story by sharing it, I become the person who is writing it. I'm not letting somebody else write my story and what is going on with me. Stories are way more valuable than statistics. So, for example, I have lupus. It is an autoimmune disease that affects less than 10% of men are affected by it. So that gives you a number. What that number doesn't tell you is what that feels like to be a minority within a minority, right? People with lupus are already a minority. Now I'm a man with it's lonely. And a lot of the literature I look up, it's mostly for women. On the flip side, autism, women are far less likely to be diagnosed than men. So if you are a woman who's autistic, then you are, again, a minority within a minority, and that can affect your story and how you live that experience. Um, it also might be the demographics, where you live. If you're high income or low income, the family that you grew up in. So if you are, say, if you are bipolar and you live in a family that is understanding of that and they're fully accepting, they're supporting you all the way, then your story is going to be one way. But if you live in a family that does not even believe in mental health and they don't want to talk about it, that can give you an entirely different perspective. So statistics are nice. I'm not saying they're terrible, but having a story that goes with a statistic can give it life because it's felt. And personal stories can help us feel seen. And not just in bigger stages, even in smaller spaces. So, for example, am part of a NAMI chapter I go to once a week. And when we go around the table and share our stories and what we're struggling with, it helps us feel seen. It helps us feel like, oh, I'm real. I'm also dealing with this. And maybe somebody doesn't have the same diagnosis as you, but they might deal with some of the things that you also deal with. So we had a conversation a few weeks ago about intrusive thoughts, and we didn't all have the same diagnosis. But when we shared our stories and what we went through and what worked for us, what didn't work for us, for everyone, we all agreed that the biggest takeaway that night was we're not alone. We're not the only one dealing with this, because sometimes that can be the worst thing about mental health struggles is that it's not seen, it's not visible, and it can make you feel very isolated and alone, like you're the only person dealing with that. So stories help us feel seen and feel validated, and for me, it helps with the healing process. Vulnerability, it invites trust, but I'm also going to be real with you. It can also invite attack. I had a YouTube short I made about a sensory kit that I made, and there were a number of people in the comments that said some very unkind things. So that is where what I said earlier, which is don't share something if you're not ready. It has to be something that you're ready to share and ready to talk about. I would never want to encourage you to share when you are not ready to talk about that piece of your story. But do know that vulnerability does invite trust though. When you are willing to be vulnerable, and the people that feel seen by your story, they're more willing to trust your narrative because you are coming from a place of authenticity. You're not just sharing your victories, you're also sharing your struggles. So super short version of my story. Like I said, I was completely undiagnosed when I was younger. And that was very confusing. I grew up thinking that I was the problem, that I was the common denominator of everything that went wrong, whether it was health, physical or mental health issues. In 2017, I collapsed while getting ready to go on a field trip, take students on a field trip. And that led to an urgent care visit, which led to an ER visit, which led to a bunch of tests and doctors and also therapists, which culminated in me receiving in 1 month, I received like four different diagnoses. The big ones being lupus, anxiety, and autism spectrum disorder and depression. And that was life changing because for me, I realized, oh, I'm not broken. Oh, I'm not the problem. I'm just built different, as the kids like to say. And that was so liberating. And that set me on a journey of healing. I did occupational therapy, regular therapy, all kinds of things. And it changed how I created content. Before that, I did have a YouTube account, I did have a TikTok account, but I was trying to make things that I thought other people wanted to see. And I switched gears and I started sharing my story. And I'm a nerd, so I might make comic book references throughout this. And one of them is the Bane reference. In Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight Rises, Bane says no one cared who he was until he put on the mask. And for me, it was the opposite. No one really cared about what I was creating until I took off the mask. When I started unmasking, when I started sharing my struggles, my highs, my lows, what I found interesting, the poetry I was writing, that's when I started building an audience. Um, and it wasn't about me being impressive. It wasn't about me being cool or doing cool tricks or a fun dance or telling funny jokes. It was just very visceral, very real, or just sometimes, I'm pretending I'm an elf in the woods kind of thing. Um, please. All right. Welcome. And it was me, and the more I unmasked, the more I shared my story and what I learned along the way, the more it resonated with people. And and I think what really helped was it wasn't about ego. It wasn't always about me. It was about helping others feel less alone. Yes, sharing my story helped me feel seen, definitely. But more importantly, it was the people who would tell me that they felt seen because I shared about a depressive episode or I shared about those days when I'm super anxious and there's nothing to be anxious about. If you asked me why I was anxious, I couldn't tell you, but I was a bundle of nerves. And people would say, I get that. That resonates with me. Or I'd sing a song about remember to take your meds this morning because I forget all the time. And so it was, if I sing a song about it, it helped me remember it. And so I'd post videos singing about it and people would say, oh, thank you. That was helpful. And it was about serving people. And the biggest thing for me was so much of my life I'd felt invisible. And when I realized I was real and I was sharing my real story, that's when I really started to be seen. All right, real quick, do me a favor in the chat. Can you let me know pacing wise? Am I talking too fast? Am I talking too slow? I want to make sure that I'm going at a pace that is useful. I do tend to speed up talking as I get really into what I'm talking about. So that would be helpful. Anybody? How am I doing? Too fast, too slow? Just keep going. All
You're
right.
good.
All right. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. All right. Very helpful. All right. Everyone's story matters. And quick aside, um, teaching history, one of the things we always come across is when teaching about the Roman Empire, we would come across a period of Rome called the Pax Romana. It was a 500-year span of Roman history where, according to historians, things went quite well. And I thought that was wild to me that 500 years was summed up in one term. So many lives lived, so many adventures that people went on, so many things that happened, so many people that fell in love. And it's all just under this 500-year span, Pax Romana. And that's part of what I said earlier about how it's not just the stories we tell, it's the stories we don't tell. And when stories don't get told, it could send the false information that everyone's story doesn't matter, when in reality, everyone's story does. And you don't need special credentials to share your story. You don't need a PhD in storytelling because you just need you. You need your own lived experience. What you went through automatically authorizes you to tell your story. Lived experience is experience. And the challenges opportunities bit, I almost didn't put that in there because I know sometimes that can be used to kind of gaslight you when you're going through something. And it's like, well, let's just see it as an opportunity. It's real. Sometimes things are just a problem, right? But with the things that you've overcome, those stories can be reframed as a potential insight, not an obligation to share, but a permission to connect. So, for example, when I talk about going through depressive episodes and how one of the lessons that I've learned is that I don't make major decisions when I'm in a depressive episode. And I've shared that because that was a lesson that I learned. That was an opportunity I found within the challenge of living with depression. And I found it to be very helpful because I can point to bad decisions I've made when I was in depressive episodes. I've thrown things away because I'm never going to do this and no one's ever going to care about it. And I remember throwing like hundreds of dollars of equipment away for creative equipment away because I was like, no one's ever going to care about what I'm doing. And then that depressive episode lifted, and I was like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. So I've learned the hard way. No big decisions when I'm in a depressive episode. So that's just an example of something that we you can share with others as you learn about coping strategies and things that work for you as you navigate your health journey. So next part we're going to get into is the actual structure of telling stories. I'm not going to really get into a lot as far as the nuts and bolts of content creation. Like I'm not really going to talk about cameras or lightings or things like that right now. If that's something that people are interested in, I'm happy to put together something along that lines another time and kind of share what I use and how I do that. But right now, I want to talk about more how we tell stories because this is something that we can use everywhere, whether we are in a job interview or with our therapist, or if you are wanting to write a blog or create videos, or just in conversations with people. Following a basic storytelling structure can be a great way to get our stories out there. So I want to talk about the basic elements. It's kind of what's taught in school when it comes to storytelling. But it's not just for writers. Like I said, it works in many different scenarios. But stories have a character and setting. Who were you? What was happening in your life at that time? Where were you? Conflict, what challenge did you face? What was difficult? The plot, how did you respond? What actions did you take? And then the resolution and lesson, what was the result and what did you learn from it? Um, Very simple example. For Mother's Day, I wanted to make my wife breakfast in bed. So I was at home, I was in the kitchen. She wanted pancakes, and I looked in the cabinet and realized I didn't have any pancake mix. And I am terrible with multi-step instructions when it comes to baking or anything bread-like. I don't know why, but it just freaks me out and I'm immediately overwhelmed. So we didn't have it. So that was my conflict. What did I do? Got in the car, I went to the store, and well, first I went online, looked for which store had the pancake mix that she likes. And then I went to that store, got the pancake mix, came home, made her the pancakes, and served her breakfast in bed. So very simple version of that, not complicated. And that's the best thing about this structure. It doesn't have to be a deep, dark thing or an overly intricate scenario. It's simply where were you? Who were you in that moment? What was the conflict? How'd you try to fix it? Did you fix it? And what did you learn? So there are different settings, like I said, that this can work in. One is support groups and therapy. In therapy, it really helps when I'm talking to my therapist and I'm trying to explain something that I'm struggling with. So, for example, I like to wear kilts, which is not quite normal here in America, and definitely not normal for Black men to be walking around in kilts. And at first, it was a sensory thing. It's more comfortable for me than pants. But my stress was I was afraid of being laughed at or people giving me a hard time for wearing a non-standard piece of clothing. And one day I finally just was like, I just need to try. So I put a kilt on and I went out in public. I went to go run errands and no one said a word to me except for one very nice elderly couple who pulled me aside and told me how wonderful I looked and how they loved it. That was it. And I began to realize that people are so busy worrying about themselves, they don't have time to worry about what I'm wearing. So, but when I told that story to my therapist and that structure, it helped her kind of say, okay, here's where she saw something worth talking about. Yes, very similar to the NAMI way of sharing stories. Absolutely right. And which is why it works very well in support group settings. When you're sharing your stories in that structure, it helps everyone there kind of know what you navigated, what you went through. It's very good for public speaking and advocacy. So if you are talking with somebody trying to explain why this situation is a problem, the character could be a group of people. It could be, a population of people with depression within your city or within your area. It could be, what a group of people are struggling with and what their conflict is and the different ways they've tried to solve that. And what the lesson we've learned is we need more support system, we need more help, or this is something that should be more people should know about because it's helpful. And then social media online. So that's what I've done. I have built a following of about 3,000 people on YouTube and 100,000 on TikTok. And it's been a way for me to, again, share my story, share what I've learned. And it's also been a platform for advocacy for mental health for me. So that is another way, you're creating accessible content, you're building virtual support networks that can help support not only you, but other people within that community. So I want you guys to take a moment and I just want you to try this if you're comfortable. I want you to take a couple minutes to recall a personal experience that you've been through or that you've shaped or that shaped you. And it could be something as simple as the pancake story that I told, right? Or it could be something a little bit more complex, like maybe your diagnosis story. But take a moment to think about that. And like I said, choose something meaningful, but it doesn't need to be meaningful for this exercise. But definitely please don't choose anything that is too fresh or too painful. That could be a little bit harder to calmly pull it apart and look for the different elements to it. And then as you think about it, write a short answer, could just be one word answers. It doesn't you have to write it down. You can even just think it in your head, quite frankly. But what happened? How did you respond? What resulted? And what did you learn? We're not going to form small groups, but I would like to give a few of you an opportunity to share if you'd like to. So I'm going to stop talking here for a couple minutes and give you a moment to think about a scenario that you might want to share. Right. Does anybody want to share anything? Again, no pressure if you don't want to, but I wanted to give you an opportunity if you wanted to.
I could share.
All right, go for it.
The the question was what we've been through, like something we've been through and what we learned from it.
Yes.
Um, I uh I had a I struggled with mental health challenges for a long, long time. And um I finally, after getting therapy and other things, for many years that just didn't seem to work because I wasn't doing the work. Even though I was doing therapy and all of that, but I wasn't actually applying it. And I finally was ready to focus on myself and really do the work. And once I was open to that, it opened up the world for me.
Mm,
And I started taking care of myself, um, really focusing on what was good and some of the bad things that I've gone through and walked through the fire. And I came out stronger on the other end. I found my identity. It was very lonely at first, but I've found that for the first time in my life, I actually love myself and I like who I am. And that was something I could never say before.
it's awesome. It's awesome. Thank you. And that's exactly what I'm talking about here. That's perfect. Thank you so much. And because that it gives for somebody who is struggling, Diana, like to hear you share and your very real lived experience, that can go such a long way for somebody else who feels that struggle. And anyway, yeah, that was awesome. Thank you so much. All right. There we go. All right. So, and just remember that, when you're sharing these, it's okay if it's not perfect. Like it doesn't need to flow perfectly for it to be a story worth hearing. What matters is that it's real, not that it's flawless. All right. So I want to talk about some fears and challenges in storytelling because I definitely had a lot of that when I was going through it. And so there's a few things I kind of wanted to encourage you with. Number one, you have control. You're in charge of your narrative. You share only what you want and when you're ready, and you only go into as much detail as you want to go into. So if you only want to reference, like if I want to talk about just depression and I was in a depressive episode and not go into any detail, then that's fine. If I want to say I was in a depressive episode and I wasn't eating, I wasn't bathing, I kind of sat up one day and I was like, oh my goodness, I reek. Um, and I'm lightheaded because I haven't been eating. That is, I can choose how much detail I give the story, right? So you have control. You decide how much to share and when. But do know that your story is valid. Imposter syndrome is very real. It can, especially if you are sharing your story in a social media setting or an advocacy setting, it can really feel like, who am I to be sharing this story? Who am I for anyone to listen to me? And your perspective, like I said earlier, your perspective is valid, and your perspective and your story matters, and it has value. So please know that. Um, this part's really important. You're not everyone's cup of tea, and that's okay. Not everyone's gonna get it. You speak for your people, not for applause. And especially if you do choose to try to create a community online, whether it's through a blog or social media, there's gonna be a time where no one's gonna know what you're doing except for a few people. And that can be, there's two ways to look at that. One, it could be discouraging because not a lot of people are showing up or seeing your content. Only five people saw your video, one person liked it, no one saw your video, no one liked it. But the positive part of that is it's a great time to make mistakes because you don't have a large audience. So you can kind of experiment with, different settings and how you want to tell your story and how you want to, share whatever it is that you want to share. And then as you get into that groove and your audience grows, you're gonna possibly feel less willing to take those risks. So there's two different ways to look at that. But most importantly, knowing that not everyone's going to care. And even now, like I've posted videos that have gotten hundreds of thousands of views, and I've gotten videos that got 10 views. And it's not even about how much work I put into it. It's, you know, I did a video that I was just rambling about a segment of TikTok called Witch Talk and the cozy videos they make and baking, and I thought that was so cool. And that video, like last I checked, like 900,000 views. And I didn't even do anything impressive. It wasn't great camera work. It wasn't great storytelling. It was just me rambling. And then did another video that I put a lot of work into. Like I worked on the script. I made sure the lighting was just right. My outfit looked great. It was a good video. 200 people saw it. 10 people liked it. 3 people commented. So the truth is the the way the reception's not always going to match the amount of work you put into it. So try not to let that discourage you too much. But honestly, those days happen. And I have had days where it's like, I'm never going to make another video again. Um, but it does take time for your audience to find you. And most importantly, protect your peace. Okay, you're not required to bleed on stage for real. If you are not comfortable sharing a particular story, you don't need to. If you've been sharing for a while and your audience is growing and you realize you need to take a step back, do it. Yes, the algorithms tend to reward, especially on YouTube, Instagram and TikTok, they tend to reward consistent posting. I can't post consistently because I've had days where I'm so anxious, I don't even want to touch the camera, I don't want to write anything, or I'm too depressed to do it, and I won't post for a week or two. One time I went a month without doing anything. So create at your own pace. Protect your boundaries. That is so important because if you don't, then you can end up putting yourself into a negative spiral. So that is just very important to remember. Protect your peace. It matters. Your core audience will not abandon you over that. If anything, they'll respect you for it. All right. And then, yep. And then continuing using storytelling. Sorry, I just blocked my own screen. All right. Start small. Begin with trusted spaces. Um, trusted friends, support groups. I'm gonna tell y'all something, and you can laugh at me if you want to, but I love skulls. I don't know why, but I collect them. So this one is Hugh. This is Midas, and then I've got others around. And I'll set them up and talk to them if I don't feel like talking to a human. If it's something I'm not ready to share with a human being, I will do that. I also have stuffed animals, or plushies. I've got all kinds, but this one's my absolute favorite. This one is named Bear with No Name. It is my oldest plushie. My wife got it from when we were dating 20 years ago. Yeah, 22 years ago. Wow, you are an old bear, aren't you? Yes, you are, but I love you anyway. Anyway, all right. And I have no I used to be really embarrassed about that. Like, I have stuffed animals. Now I don't even care. But I'll talk to my teddy bear. If I need to practice what I want to say or how I want to say it, or sometimes I'll talk to the teddy bear and never talk to anybody else. Is that weird? Yes, but is it helpful? It is. Well, it helps me. Might not help you. I don't know your life. Um, there is also journaling. I know we talk about journaling is talked about a lot in mental health spaces, but I know that journaling is not for everybody. For some people, verbal processing is better or easier. So I would say whatever way helps you get your story out, whether it is to a stuffed animal, whether it's to a trusted friend or family member or partner, start small. Um, if you feel up for it, advocate for change. Use your story to highlight issues. I wrote like handicap parking access at libraries because last year, so I also have knee issues and back issues. I'm not really going to bore you with all my health problems. I have a lot of health problems. Anyway, so I have a handicap tag because sometimes walking is really difficult. Great to sound like a great plan to do before advocating. Yes, talking to my skulls, my plushies is a way for me to get my ideas together before I go and talk to somebody. So the parking access. So I was going to the library and because I had a student that I was tutoring, and they were renovating the bathrooms. And so they got porta potties, and they put the porta potties to cover the three handicapped spots closest to the door. And that was, I was upset. I wasn't sure if I didn't know if I should be upset. It seemed like something to be upset about. So I actually ended up talking to one of my skulls, talked to Glenn. And then after that, I felt comfortable making a video. So I made a video about it. And several of my followers like, no, that's not okay. So I talked to Glenn, my skull, again, to get my thoughts together. And then I wrote an email to the library and outlined the problem. I said, hey, you guys have these things in the way. There are some of us who have mobility issues. My mobility issues are painful, but there are people I know who literally would not be able to get in if they had to park that far away, who are in worse situations than myself. So I advocated for myself and those like me, and they ended up getting back to me saying, "Thank you for bringing the issue to light. They're going to move them." And it took a couple of days, but they did. They moved them to another location. And that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't advocated for change. And I will be on, I will tell, I was terrified, guys. I don't do that kind of thing. I'm not that kind of person. I am a quiet, sit in the corner, mind my business person. But saying something, who knows, somebody else who might not have been able to or was comfortable saying something, that issue was resolved for them because I spoke up. I don't always speak up when I should. I'm trying to do better, but telling our story is a way to advocate for change. Again, like I've already mentioned before, sharing online by developing a presence through blogs, podcasts, social media communities, whatever format is comfortable for you. There are very many different ways. And then I think, yeah. And then, of course, like I said before, protect your boundaries, prioritize self-care, start with stories that no longer trigger you emotionally. That is really important. I would strongly encourage you to start with stories that you've got a handle on, you know who you are after that, you're solid with it, and you're ready to move forward. Likewise, there are stories I don't share because they're too raw. I'm a lot more comfortable now sharing some of the more raw stories, but that's only because I've been doing this for a number of years now. But never, I would never feel like you have to share something that's not comfortable with for you in that moment. The words. All right, friends. So that is my presentation work thingy. I hope this was helpful. I hope this was useful. Like I said, these are things that I have learned along the way, building my support group. I do want to share kind of like a really positive story that happened recently. I lost my, I lost my Medicaid, Medicare. I forget, I get the terms mixed up, but you know what I mean. Because I was on Medicaid or Medicare, whichever one it's called, and it covered, paid for all my health stuff. And back in February, I lost it, and I was, needless to say, that was really stressful. Not sure what to do. I was trying to find different plans. I figured out something's gonna be able to work out in July for me to start having health care again, because it just took me a long time to find something that works with all my health issues. Blah blah blah. But the point is, I've been having to pay for my meds out of pocket, and even with discount programs, there's some I just couldn't afford to pay for. And I finally realized that I'm not going to make it through June if I don't ask for help. And so I went to my online communities and I was very honest, like, guys, hey, you already know that I've lost it. I talked about it and I've already shared the strategies that I've learned. And I even posted resources on my website for anyone else in the same situation. But the reality is, this is as soon as I can have them. I'm going to struggle to make it through June. I need to raise some money to help me pay for medications to get me through this month. And within 45 minutes, that fundraiser was complete. The people in my community showed up. Some people gave $1. Like it wasn't like, not one person showed up and said, I've got a $500 for you. It was very small, but it, I'm going to be able to get the meds I need to get through the month of June because of that. Um, I will say that asking for help doesn't always work. That's the third time I've been in a situation where I've asked for help. The other two times, nothing really happened. And it doesn't always mean that no one cares. It could also just mean that they are not in a place where they can help, But I just want to say that when you build communities, that does give that opportunity for things like this to happen. It's also put me in opportunities to help others. When I was in a position to help someone financially, I would have someone in my community say, "Hey, I'm struggling. Can you help?" And if I can, I do. All right, friends. So, um, I will stop talking now. I hope this is helpful. I hope this is useful. Are there any questions that you all have for me? And you can literally ask me anything. I'll either answer it or just say I'm not ready yet to answer that question. But please feel free to ask anything you like. You can either unmute yourself and ask, or you can put it in the chat, whatever's more comfortable for you.
If anyone has questions that they think of after, you can absolutely reach out to me. I can then reach out to Eryk, get any questions that you have answered. Um,
That's perfect. All right, friends. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for attending this workshop. I greatly appreciate it. Appreciate your time. And again, like I said, I hope this was helpful. I hope this encourages you to take your stories and bring them out to the real world. Ooh, how do you change your storytelling style for groups? That is a really good question. If I am, hmm, if I'm delivering my story to a group of people, I tend to I tend to be a little bit restrictive with the emotional part of it. I try to rehearse the story ahead of time, or at least pre-plan what stories I'm going to tell, and make sure that if I know the group that I'm going to be talking to, I try to tell the stories that relate to that group. Now, today my stories are kind of all over the place. I've told mental health stories, I've told physical health stories. Um, but the idea would be to kind of focus on that group. So if I'm working with, for example, students or people under the age of 18, then I'm going to tailor the stories, try to tailor them in a way that's relatable to them. I might draw in examples or analogies from video games or TV shows if I know that they like them. It depends on how well I know the group. If I'm talking with parents, I'm going to talk more from the perspective of either a parent, which I am myself, or retroactive stories of what it was like when I was younger and what my parents either did that was helpful or what I wish they did that was helpful. So I try to, if I can, to the best of my ability, make the story relevant to the people that I'm talking to. And if you can plan that ahead of time, that does really help get your mind into certain themes, if that makes sense, for the people that you're talking to that's relevant to them. Because that's really what's going to make the story stick, is if they can identify with it and if it's relative to them and to your audience and what their needs are. All right, friends, I'm going to let you go at this juncture. Again, if you do have any others, yes, one-on-one is so much easier, especially if it's in person. When one-on-one is easier than groups, it does get easier with time. But again, if you have any other questions, please reach out to Nicole, let her know. She'll get in touch with me, and I'll respond. And I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend and rest of your day. And yeah, love you guys. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for doing this for me, Eryk. I know we put this together relatively quickly. Um, my thought was May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and the theme of this year was sharing stories. But I also like that we did this towards the end of the month because I wanted this to be a reminder that we share our stories all the time. with each other, with groups, with advocating, and it kind of ended this month on this great note of here's tips to continue sharing our story. So thank you so much, Eryk, for doing this with us, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.